things take time. Anything that's worth having is worth struggling for. Anything that is worth achieving is worth putting time and effort into.
Welcome back to the Northern Sentinels podcast. I'm your host, Chris Ayotte. On this episode, I'm joined by a man of many talents. Growing up in Nova Scotia, Randy Turner spent his time like most kids of his generation, playing sports, hanging out with friends, and trying to keep out of trouble. After high school, he ended up in the Army and eventually found his way to Canada's Special Operating Forces. After successful completion of the demanding selection and training process, he became a member of Joint Task Force 2. If he wasn't busy enough, he was also a professional mixed martial artist. After 20 years of service, he retired and became an entrepreneur and small business owner. He is now the owner and head coach of Direct Action Combat Performance in Ottawa. Before we get to our guest, a word from our partner for this episode, Double Dagger Books, a veteran-owned publisher.
This episode is in partnership with Double Dagger Books, Canada's only military and national security-focused publisher. Veteran-owned and operated, we seek to tell stories of service, struggle, and triumph, and give voice to the kinds of books we love to read. Whether fiction, history, or memoir, our books uncover the hard truths revealed by war. Our books are available online and wherever books are sold. Find out more at our website, doubledagger.ca.
And now, my conversation with Randy Turner. Randy, thanks for having me down to the Direct Action Gym today, and this is certainly a first for me in terms of doing an interview, and it's probably the only time I would want to be on the mat with you is when I'm doing an interview and not engaged in combatives at all. So thanks for taking the time and having me into your space here.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thanks for having me, and I look forward to the conversation together.
We talked earlier, we went through a whole bunch of different really interesting subjects, and we'll get to those. And I always like to start, though, with family background. I think it sets a good stage for where we all came from, sort of literally and figuratively. Mm-hmm. So maybe on your mom's side, where's your mom from? Where's her family from?
Sure. So I was born and raised in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Both my mom and dad, they reside from Cape Breton, which is about a 5-hour drive from Halifax. Lineage is my mom is Irish, so her family comes from a town of Cork in Ireland. And my dad is Scottish, and his family comes from a town of Inverness in Scotland. So that's where the family lineage comes from. However, I was born and raised in Halifax and 100% Canadian.
You ever get a chance to sort of go back to Ireland or Scotland with them and visit some of your ancestral home?
No, but I've encouraged mom and dad on several occasions to take that trip. I would love to do it with them. It'd be great to walk those grounds with them. They're a bit reluctant to travel, and they're getting a little bit older, and I think that window may have closed, but I mention it every year. and it's on my bucket list as well. Like I really want to walk those grounds and shake the hands and say hello to those folks, because I never have. I've only been to Scotland once, and I didn't go to Inverness. Passed through Ireland, but didn't spend any time there. So yeah, it's definitely on the bucket list.
I don't know what the draw is, but it seems to be that everybody has a little bit of that internal pull to visit wherever their foremothers came from. So I haven't done that either. Actually, I mean I was born in England, and this summer we're going to take a trip and actually go through the place where I was born.
Amazing.
Yeah,
good for you.
So. Haven't been there. I left when I was 2.
Oh yeah. That's going to be great.
Yeah. Good so it's I'm with you, but I also get the fact that as you age, the last thing you want to be doing is sitting on an airplane for 7 or 8 hours and then getting into a rental car. So yeah. I can totally appreciate their point of view. Yeah. Now, what was their lives like in Cape Breton growing up? What did their parents do, and what did that look like? Yeah.
So on my dad's side, he didn't know his dad, so he didn't know much of his background. He was raised by my grandmother, his mom. And, they had a pretty tight family, a couple of brothers that were tight, cousins that were tight, but it was really a family that was raised by the grandmother. And on my mom's side, she came from a big family, lots of brothers and sisters. So I have lots of lots of aunts and uncles that are on my mom's side, where growing up as a kid, I remember us all being pretty close, and summer vacations in Cape Breton, we'd all spend time together. And then as we got older, there was, a little bit of family turmoil, internal squabbling. And I just recall as the years went on, the relationships were tarnished a little bit, and it's a little bit unfortunate because now that we're a little bit older, I realize that family is really, really important, and it's never too late to mend ties. And I do believe that, time does heal all wounds. It's just a bit of a struggle with internal egos, like whose fault it was to point the finger at so-and-so for one thing or another. So I certainly don't want to illustrate a negative upbringing, because it wasn't like that at all. But in terms of the extended family, we could have been a lot closer.
Is that sort of philosophy about like bygones be bygones something you've always sort of had, or is that just something that you've developed as you've gotten older and, maybe had a few revelations about what really is important?
Yeah, I think definitely as I've gotten older, kind of let that stuff slide a little bit easier and realize that we're all human. Everyone makes mistakes. Sometimes we say things that we didn't mean. Sometimes we say things that we meant in the moment, but it wasn't meant to be hurtful. And at the end of the day, we all make mistakes. And I think being able to just forgive and get on with it and share some positive and lift each other up is more important than hanging on to an element of negativity that does nothing than, just really bring you down on the inside. So that's kind of, maybe a mantra, philosophy, or a view on life that has been established over a few years now that I'm a little bit older. Time is precious, and when you get a chance to spend time with quality people who lift you up, then I'll take those opportunities rather than dwelling on the negative and, ripping my teddy bear up and throwing it in the corner for something that happened years ago.
Yeah, I think if more people took that approach to life, many problems would just work themselves out.
Yeah.
Now, what did your folks do when you were growing up?
Sure. My dad was a hard-working steel worker, so he was an iron worker. He did that profession for 50 years. And my mom was a stay-at-home mom, so I had two older brothers. So mom was at home ensuring that we were doing our homework and, fed properly and going to school on time and not being too much of, the typical teenage jackasses. and my dad was working hard. So my dad was a steel worker. He traveled a little bit. He spent some time in different parts of the world, creating, monstrous satellite dishes for a company that he used to work for. So he traveled a little bit, but nothing glorious. Blue collar, hardworking steel worker. He worked until he was 73 years old. He was literally, like scaling I-beams on top of multi-story structures with 22 and 23-year-olds. So, he's a beast. He's a beauty.
Did you get a sense, or maybe you asked him about this? Was his identity wrapped up in his work, like that work ethic? Did he see himself as that being sort of part of his being? Is that why he worked that long?
I believe so. Yeah, I think when. Well, not. I think I saw it. I saw when he retired, there was a couple of years of struggle where he was trying to find himself and trying to figure out what he was going to do with his time. And then COVID happened. So he didn't have a lot of time to kind of enjoy his retirement. And then really COVID kind of put a stifle onto anything that he might have been thinking about doing, was unable to do, which is really tough to see and watch. Because, he put so much time and effort into his work. Worked his butt off so we could play hockey, we could play soccer. It was just, at the time when you're a young man, you don't quite appreciate what your parents do for you to try to keep you out of trouble and try to keep you involved until later on, and you realize the cost of a hockey stick, for example. So my dad worked extremely hard, kept us out of trouble as best as he could, and I think when he did retire, there was a piece of him, a large piece of him that was lost.
How did you spend your time as a kid then? I mean, you're talking about sports now. Was that your main focus, or what else did you sort of distract yourself or occupy yourself with? Yeah,
as a kid, I had a pretty tight-knit group of friends that were all close by. We all lived within 10 minutes of each other, so most of us were involved in some sort of sports, baseball, hockey, football, and it was always the same group of guys that would typically play hockey together or play sports together. So we hung out together, played sports together, got in trouble together as we got older, got thrown in jail together. Like, it's stuff that, not proud of, but it was all part of growing up and making mistakes and learning along the way. So, yeah, I mean, sports definitely kept me out of trouble. And I also appreciate team sports so much more than individual sports, because that camaraderie and, they win as a team, lose as a team, celebrate as a team, suffer as a team. It just means so much more than when you're on your own. So, like, I'm very thankful for every opportunity to play those team sports.
Did your older brothers sort of have a similar approach in terms of they had a lot of sports and that's what occupied their time, or did they take sort of different paths?
A little bit different paths. My oldest brother, he was well, actually, we all played sports, yeah. But my oldest brother, he was a bit of a jock. Like, he played football, he played hockey. And then my middle brother, he predominantly hockey and baseball. So, yeah, we I guess we all kind of played sports. And then as we got older, so there's a 9-year separation from me and my oldest brother. So we weren't really close growing up as a kid. And we're still not very close, to be completely honest. But my middle brother and I, he was a scholar. Like, he was really good at school. He was smart. He was intelligent. He just didn't apply himself. So he found ways to get himself into more trouble than probably my oldest brother or myself.
Okay.
Yeah. But I think that was his way of, just living a little bit of an excitement, adding some excitement to his life. Because he was really smart and he knew better. But I think he kind of dabbled a little bit with the less optimal lifestyle for a couple of years.
Yeah.
But yeah, we were all involved in sports in some capacity, but I think I was probably, of all three of us, I was probably the biggest jock.
Okay.
Yeah, any sport I was willing to play. It didn't matter what it was, volleyball, basketball, hockey, football, I was all in. Do
you have a sense as a kid, like maybe in high school or even before, what you wanted to do after high school?
Yeah, I was pretty convinced I was going to be a police officer.
Okay.
Yeah, I was really interested in becoming a police officer. When I graduated high school, I applied to the RCMP, and I also applied to a couple of universities, thinking, I'll see which one gets back to me. And the decision was made pretty easily for me to join the military when I got thanks, but no thanks from the RCMP and from a couple of different universities. So I wasn't really an academic. I wasn't interested in going to school. I just thought it was the right path to do something. But I was really interested in becoming a police officer. And then what the response that I got from the RCMP was, thanks for your application, but, you need a little bit more life experience. We highly encourage you work towards a degree and then reapply.
Okay.
So then the journey into the military was, I had an uncle at the time who was in the Navy. So he did 35 years in the Navy. And he was a hall tech, so he shared a little bit about what they do as an occupation. It seemed pretty interesting. So he took me down to the recruiting center in Halifax, and that's how the journey started. So I originally applied to join the Navy, and that was my interest, and follow his footsteps because his job seemed pretty neat. And I remember walking into the recruiting center, and there was a video playing on the TV, and there was dudes launching themselves out of airplanes and carrying guns and with rucksacks on their back, and I was like, that's what I want to do. My uncle was like,
is that the Navy?
Yeah,
no,
yeah,
that's not the Navy.
That's exactly what happened. That's exactly what happened. I'm like, who are those guys? What are they doing? That looks interesting. And my uncle, I remember him just kind of laughing, shaking his head. He's like, I kind of figured, but I was hoping you'd kind of go this way. So anyway, that's kind of how that unfolded in terms of high school to university. I had an interest in becoming a police officer, and it just didn't work out that way.
Now, when you, like, a little bit about maybe expectations or what you thought the military was going to be like when you went to basic, or maybe when you went to battle school or even landed in the battalion, I mean, did that sort of experience align to what you thought it would be, or was it really a different sort of experience from what you had in your mind's eye?
No, it actually was pretty accurate. Like, I thought when I joined basic training, I thought, we'd be screamed at and spit on and smacked around. And I was like prepared for the worst. And that's what I thought I was kind of getting into. And, my uncle did he tried to educate me. He's like, listen, it's not like that. He said, it's going to be challenging for you. However, it's not like that. They're not intending to beat the snot out of you. But that's kind of what I prepared for, and that's what I visioned in my head. And, at that time, it was not uncommon where, you'd be insulted, you'd be yelled at. I remember getting shoved a couple times by instructors, and I was okay with it. I was like, this is what I signed up for. I'm joining the Army. Like, this is good. Talking to folks that have, over the last 2 decades, gone through basic training, it's considerably different than it was as of 1998 when I went through. But what I experienced in basic training, it was in pretty close proximity to what I thought I was going to experience. It was tough, not hard, but it was tough. For someone that literally just left high school, it was good. It was good, and I liked it. And then fast forward, get to infantry school. So I went to Wainwright, Alberta, as part of the PPCLI, and I had some awesome instructors and I had some duds. But the awesome instructors, you could tell, like, they were invested in making heart soldiers. They wanted to push guys, and they wanted to see what you were made of. And they did not have any reservations about someone wanting to quit. If they want to quit, they'd show them the door and happily help them pack their bags. It was different than the way it is today. And I appreciated that at the time. And so some of those things that I kind of expected in basic training, some of those things that I expected out of infantry school, they were pretty accurate.
Your reflection on battle school mirrors sort of Steve Macbeth's, that reverence for the professional soldier that takes their job extremely seriously and understands that the people they're training them for their worst day, and they're training them to be part of a team that's going to deal with some pretty horrible things potentially in the future. So it's interesting to hear your reflection, because that's very similar to the same thing that Steve said about his time at battle school in Wainwright and in the battalion as well. And which battalion did you go to when you? 2nd
Battalion. So I went to 2nd Battalion PPCLI. At that time, they were in Winnipeg. And then the year that I did selection for JTF2 was the year that Winnipeg moved to Shiloh.
How long were you in the battalion for before you went to selection?
5 years.
Okay. When you look at those 5 years, I mean, what are some of the things that you learned in the conventional Army that you think maybe served you well in the next phase of your career?
Oh yeah, so much. I learned so much. I learned how to soldier. I learned how to read a map. I learned that doing my job meant the guy to my left and to my right could do their job better. I learned that guys were depending on me to hold my end of pull my end of the load, so to speak, and it was awesome. I was in no rush to leave the 2nd Battalion PPCLI. I was in no hurry to get out of there for the sake of what it was. I just knew I wanted to do more, and the PPCLI taught me how to soldier, taught me how to work as a team, taught me a little bit about accountability, taught me that there is a right and a wrong, and we as a professional in uniform have an obligation and a duty to right a wrong. And that was all from PPCLI. Like they taught me that, and I'll be forever, indebted and grateful for that. And when I say I was in no rush to leave, I had no problem with the conventional forces. I just wanted to do more. There was a lot of downtime, which is not optimal for someone that's motivated and wants to get after it. And my exposure to JTF2 was in 2002. So when I deployed with the first conventional forces that deployed in Afghanistan, we had witnessed, some of the JTF2 guys doing their thing, but there was so much secrecy surrounded what they were doing and where they were operating and what they were operating as, and I found it intriguing, and that's kind of what lit the fire in me to want to do more. But yeah, the PPCLI, nothing but good things to say about the folks that I worked with during those years.
I think that's a great message, and my sense is these days is that people just want instant sort of gratification, and they don't have the sort of patience to understand that what they're doing right now has value, and they can learn from it and they don't have to move from one thing immediately to the next thing. And, that might work for them for whatever reason, but by and large, I just get this sense that people just sort of skip through things and they're not actually pulling from that experience. So that's a pretty mature view for a young soldier to take, especially when the allure of the shiny thing is drawing you in. Yeah.
I think some of the stories that I hear from the conventional forces, the guys that I still stay in contact with or who reach out to me every now and again, and I ask them, like, what are some of the things that you're experiencing? There just doesn't seem to be a lot of happy people right now for one reason or another. But generally speaking, from some of the stories and some of the information that guys have shared with me, there are a lot of people in uniform who would be very quick to cast shade on their own, very quick to pull somebody down, very quick to highlight, a criticism, and instead of lifting these guys and being a mentor and showing them they have an opportunity to learn something. From the stuff that has been shared with me over the last couple of years, it's appalling, it's a little bit embarrassing, and it's disappointing because there's a lot of good soldiers, a lot of good men and women who deserve to be, mentored, deserve to be taught a thing or two, rather than always being highlighted what they're not good at or what they made a mistake in, or, simple things like, just one story that is still fresh in my head because I just heard it literally last week. There's a storesman, working in an infantry unit, and his job is to account for firearms, right? It's an important job.
Yeah.
Serialized numbers,
100%.
Numbers coming and going, like it's an important job. And, the story that was shared with me, this storesman, for whatever reason, not too proud of his job, doesn't like it, not happy about that position. It's an important role. It's an important position, but he'd rather be doing something else. So instead of doing something else and being a positive influence on folks, he makes it difficult. Every time a soldier comes to draw his gun to clean it or to do dry fire drills or whatever, this guy behind the counter is so insecure, negative, and ugly on the inside that has nothing else better to do but project that onto the outside to soldiers who just want to do some dry fire drills or just want to clean their gun without any pushback. But this individual has the power to be difficult and chooses to be difficult for no other reason than he hates his job, right?
Yeah.
And I said to this young man who shared the story with me, I said, that's disappointing because this young man who is responsible as the storesman to, acquire these firearms and sign for these firearms, he has an opportunity to mentor. He has an opportunity to smile and say hello to these young soldiers who are obviously keen and motivated to do some dry fire drills, as an example. But he would much rather be difficult and go out of his way to say no for no other reason than he is an ugly arsehole on the inside. And where I'm going with that story is it's people like that will drive good people out of uniform, right? A daily occurrence of dealing with these knuckleheads that just need a slap in the face or a punch in the mouth, to be completely honest. But you can't do that in today's world, right? You can't. For some reason, we are no longer allowed to confront somebody like that and say, hey, quit being an asshole. There's consequences to being an asshole. This guy chooses to be an asshole. He doesn't have to. He has a great opportunity to mentor, uplift somebody, maybe share a bit of knowledge, but he chooses not to, right? That's just one isolated incident, but my goodness, we could spend an hour highlighting the negative. But my point is, we have a choice every single day. We've got two choices. We can highlight the positive, lift somebody up, or we can continue to battle those internal negative thoughts and that dialogue of just ugliness on the inside. Right? Those are our two choices. So I don't know about you, but I know the choice that I prefer to take on a daily basis.
I mean, it just makes sense that you should be defaulting to the positive, to trying to make the world a better place, to trying to make your work environment a better place. And I was listening to something the other day on this, and it was about 3 choices that you can make, right? So you always have, I think it was on the Theo Vaughn podcast. I think it was Tony Robbins was talking about this. And I'd never really listened to much of what he had to say, but this really sort of captured it for me. He said, everything sort of negative in the world you have access to. And everything positive in the world in terms of thoughts you have access to. So here are your choices. There are 3 choices in the day. Do you want to focus your energy on what you have or what you don't have? Do you want to focus your energy on the things you can control or the things that you can't control?
Brilliant.
And do you want to focus your energy on the past, present, or future? Right? Those are sort of the 3 choices that you need to make. And if you pick the things that are going to lift you up, that are going to be positive, that's going to completely change your mood, your approach to things, how you interact with people. So to your point, right, that storesman has the ability to mentor, to create an environment where people like coming in there, they like interacting, they know they're going to learn something, whatever it is. And, so whether it be in the forces or, you go to any sort of service industry and interact with somebody. I mean, the classic one for me is going to get my license renewed, going to Service Ontario. And since, as military people, when you move around, you move provinces, and it was always difficult to try and get a license renewed. And I can remember being down in Kingston and Service Ontario in Kingston, and it was such a good experience. I actually said, "Is your manager around? Can I talk to the boss here?" She came out. She goes, "Is there a problem?" Instantly, right? That's the first thing.
Right.
It's like, "Oh, it must be a problem."
Yeah.
No, not at all. So I just wanted to say that this is the best experience I've had with Service Ontario.
Good for you.
And that person there, they made me feel welcome. They helped solve a couple of problems.
Yeah.
We had a great interaction, and just thank you for that. Because I was dreading. I was not sure how long I was going to be here, and I was dreading it. The frame is so important.
Yeah.
You'd already spoke about the wanting to do something different, and so what point did you decide it was the right time to make a move from the conventional forces and try your hand to go to CANSOF?
Sure. Yeah. So right after, I was very lucky when went to 2nd Battalion, did a peacekeeping deployment in Bosnia in 2001, came home from that, and then literally 6 months later we got spooled up for Afghanistan, which it couldn't have worked out any better. So I was super stoked and excited as a young private, really, just to get those opportunities. And when deployed in Afghanistan, our very first deployment, we did some good stuff. It was a lot of good lessons learned, and I had an opportunity to see a little bit of interaction with the JTF2 guys. And that's when I was motivated. When I came home, I said, okay, I'm going to prepare for selection, and I'm going to give this a whirl. So it took me 3 years, because the first application, I was still relatively new to PPCLI and not fully understanding the administration process. I put my application forward and all the paperwork. I'm not casting shade on my section commander at the time. Put all the paper forward in a nice fancy folder and gave it to him. And I just kind of fired and forgot, expecting that it was going to get processed. And deadline had come and gone, and I went to check up and see what the status was, and he apologized for not submitting the paperwork. So it sat on somebody's desk and never went anywhere. So I said, okay, I'm going to learn from that. And now I have another year to prepare. It's frustrated, as you can imagine, but I said, okay, everything happens for a reason. So I get back to the grindstone. I'm working, I'm training this time, stay on top of the paperwork and the administration. I follow it to the end. And then 2 weeks before I did my, it was been 2 weeks before going on selection. The window had opened for selection. I had a BPSO interview. And at that time, the night before the BPSO interview, I used to race ATVs when I lived in Winnipeg. And I was out on my bike, and I shouldn't have been, and I broke my wrist. So I showed up at the BPSO interview with a cast on my wrist, and she looked at me and said, this is going to be a problem. And I said, no. They told me 4 to 6 weeks, and the cast will be off, so I'll be ready to go for selection. She shook her head and she said, no, you have no idea what you're getting into. You need to be 100% healthy. So long story short, year number 2 came and went. So, back to doing things in the 2nd Battalion and start training again and get ready for the 3rd attempt. And luckily on the 3rd attempt, everything went through, and I was able to do selection and successfully completed. And then I was picked up and course loaded for the assaulter course, which started at that time, January 2004.
So same question about you when I asked you about basic. When you went to basic, you went to battle school, it aligned to what you had in your mind's eye. How did going through your CANSOF training align to what your expectations or what you thought it was going to be like?
Really good question. So the selection portion, the 7-day selection portion, there wasn't a lot of information available, and didn't really know what I was getting into. I assumed a lot of things. Like I assumed they were going to beat the snot out of me. I assumed they were going to try to drown me. I assumed all of these things that you can imagine, just as dark and as ugly as you can imagine, knowing that you're trying out for an elite Tier 1 Special Forces organization. So I prepared myself for the hardest test imaginable. And when running through selection, it happened all so fast, and it became a bit of a blur where I don't really recall enjoying like moments of it. I remember doing things, I'm like, this is the coolest shit I've ever done. This is amazing. But there was never really any time to enjoy it because you're on to the next thing, right? And it all happened so fast. And then when I went back to battalion waiting for a message, I was convinced that I wasn't getting picked up. I was convinced that I underperformed and I'm not what they're looking for. I convinced myself all these negative thoughts.
Right.
But the experience was so much more than what I thought. Like the 7-day selection, I learned so much about myself. I learned, so much about what the body can persevere. And I learned so much about how mentally strong some people can be and how mentally weak others can be, and we don't know them, so we have no idea why. And I learned a lot about watching, potentially 30 studs that are all, trying out for the same organization, and then, 30 start and 10 or maybe 12 finish. And you look around at the beginning, look around at the end, I'm like, where is everybody? Not knowing their backgrounds, you don't get to know them, you don't know them, you don't have any idea where they came from. They were there 1 minute and they're gone the next. So that whole experience was really unique, something I'll never forget. And then leading into the assaulter course, what I thought it was going to be like and what it actually was like was very close as well. I didn't realize that there'd be so many checkpoints for like testing and evaluation. I didn't realize that it was laid out that way. But for an example, you might get 3, 4, maybe 5 weeks, we'll say, to learn a specific skill or a mod. So a modular of training throughout a 9-month course. But every mod has an evaluation, it has a checkpoint, it has a performance check. There's a lot of pressure to perform, not just at each mod, but literally every day. So that I was not prepared for. That I didn't realize how rigorous that those types of checks and balances would be. So that was eye-opening. But learning all the hands and feet to be an assaulter, learning how to shoot, learning how to build explosives, learning some medical, learning some communication stuff. Like all of that stuff was just it was a trip. It was a ride of a lifetime. It was amazing. Yeah.
You clearly grew up doing sports. You're athletic. You just sort of talked about the hands and feet portion. But was there an aspect of a skill that you had to learn, or even a change in your lifestyle that you found, whether it be difficult or something you really had to focus on to get to a level that you were happy with, something that was kind of challenging in this new life for you?
Oh yeah, that's a really good question. I would say what was highlighting and what was a great evolution in terms of maturity was learning that we were surrounded by a lot of really highly motivated, smart people. And what I learned quickly was everybody has an idea. Everybody has a idea that they think is the best idea. And we sometimes would bump heads amongst our peers, right? Because everybody wants their idea to be pushed forward. Generally speaking, what I found interesting and what I learned a lot about was, man, when we think we have the idea, there's 10 or more other extremely smart people who probably have as good of an idea. So what was humbling and eye-opening was being a generally stubborn dude, and I want to push my idea forward, right? Knowing when to shut up, basically, and when to listen to somebody else who has a great idea. That was probably the biggest thing I learned on the Special Operations Salter course. And now, years later, with a little bit more life experience, I can truly say with confidence, to me, what makes a good leader is one who has the ability to listen, but also has the ability and the confidence and the humility to speak when something needs to be spoken. That, to me, is a good leader. Like, you're not always the guy that speaks. Sometimes you just need to shut up and listen, because there's a lot of smart people around us that have good ideas.
Now, we'd sort of talked a little bit about this before the podcast, so I'll throw the question at you now about failing in an elite environment, and how do you manage that? And as we've spoken a couple of times, I mean, perfection is the enemy of good enough, and perfection is an illusion. But when you find yourself at the highest level of your profession, I mean, how do you manage failure? Because it's coming, and is there that space or that environment to allow that to happen?
Yeah, that in that environment. So my previous place of employment, we would do training exercises, and we would do small, fun team building competitions, right? Which were great. And you could tell some people did not feel comfortable. Like, say, for example, we spend a couple hours at the range, and then before we wrap it up, we do a fun competition. And, some guys are really good shooters, so they would typically be, within the top third. So they had no problems doing these competitions. Then there's other guys who, didn't like the idea that they were going to get, shown up, or they're going to highlight an area of limitation, and you could tell, like, they would get apprehensive when it comes to competition side of things. So I would see it within the community where some guys thrive on competition and they're okay if they are not successful, and other guys not so much. They did not they did not do well with failures, not succeeding or not becoming the winner.
Not being the top of
top third, right? They didn't like it, and they didn't like it, and sometimes you could see it. They would ruin guys' days. Like, they would hang on to that and dwell on it, and leading into other parts of the training day, the guys would still be hanging on to that. So it was interesting because like at the unit they have a mantra that I never. At first, I agreed with it at the beginning. It was failure is not an option, right? So they have this mantra, and they speak about we're the force of last resort, and failure is not an option. And at the beginning, I'm like, all fired up. Yeah, failure's not an option. We can do it. Throw it at us, and we'll do it. And then as years went on, I went, wait a minute, that's a lot of pressure, and that's a daunting amount of pressure to think about. Failure is not an option. Listen, I truly believe to the core of my being, perfect doesn't exist. So the sooner we wrap our head around the fact that nothing in this world is perfect, nothing, zero. Like young girls that are just like sabotaging each other, the perfect hair, perfect lips, perfect clothes, like none of that nonsense matters. Nothing in this world is perfect. We are striving for excellence, and we want to achieve the top of our ability. But along the way, we're going to make mistakes, and I would encourage that. You're not always going to win. You're not always going to be successful, and that is important to our overall growth. So that mantra that we used to push, I don't know if the guys still do, push at the unit, I never agreed with later on in my career, because to me, if failure is not an option, it's a lot easier to say no to any type of risk for the fear of failing. Let's get on with it and accept the fact that, we're probably going to make mistakes along the way. But man, I would much rather live a life where I have at least attempted than live a life where I chose not to attempt out of fear of failure.
That's a great segue into a I wanted to ask you about decision making, things you can do, vice things you should do, and I'll use one of your deployment stories on the direct action YouTube channel that I loved about the chicken coop in Afghanistan, right? So it's funny in hindsight, but you and your fire team partner made a decision to do something, and you could have made the decision not to enter that building. To enter that building, there was a number of options available to you. So not specifically on the chicken coop, but I'll link that in the show notes because it's a great story and it had me laughing at the end. But how do you then decide in an environment that is, full of risk, threats, and being part of an organization that is incredibly mission focused, to decide maybe not to do something and looking at it and going, I just curious about how that sort of decision action cycle works.
For me personally, the way I look at it is I would much rather do something and then after the fact look back and say, eesh, I probably shouldn't have done that, as opposed to taking the choice to not do something and then later on look back and like, damn it, I missed an opportunity. I should have done that. So I'd much rather do and then wish I didn't, as opposed to not do and wish I did. That being said, when, I'm not a cowboy, I'm not a wild man, when people's lives are at stake and the severity of the situation, is the difference between life or death or severe personal injury. The decision, I believe, is based on the information that we have. We logically apply as best as we can with the information that we have. But at the end of the day, the gut, we need to listen to our gut feel. Intuitively, we have a sixth sense, and that is our survival instinct that is designed to kick in when things are serious and the consequences are unknown. We need to listen to that. That will help guide us. Sometimes the internal battle with our ego or with the commander's intent or what the mission and the job might conflict with what we're actually feeling right now at the moment. And I think if we listen to our gut, it's going to at least guide you enough to give you that time and opportunity to make a wise decision.
When did you start training mixed martial arts? How did that come into the picture?
Yeah, I started in 2007. I started to dabble with it a little bit. So I was at the unit for a couple of years, and I started to dabble with it. And then 2008, I really started to take it serious and started to train almost every day. And I turned pro in late 2008, and then I fought professional mixed martial arts until 2018. When I started it, Afghanistan was very much a thing in the early days, and we were doing 4 and 5 month rotations, and it was awesome. It was awesome because when you weren't deployed, you would go into a rest and refit cycle, and then right after that, you'd go right into preparing for the next rotation. So it was a consistent, evolving door for years. It was awesome. And martial arts helped me, I think, deal with pressure, helped me deal with tempo, and it gave me an outlet to think about something other than work. And when I left work, I literally left work. I checked out mentally because martial arts was a passion of mine, and I would literally leave work, drive to the gym, and train until 9 o'clock at night. And I would do that on a pretty regular basis. I wasn't married, didn't have kids at the time.
Right.
So for me, martial arts was it was a savior. I looking back at it now, I'm convinced, like, without martial arts at that time, I'm not sure I would be the person I am today.
How did you manage injuries? Now, I mean, a lot of people just try to get to a certain level of fitness to do something, but you're now splitting your time between being a soft assaulter and being a professional mixed martial artist. I mean, there's got to be some pretty good strain on the body happening.
Oh, buddy, let me tell you. Yeah, there wasn't a day that I wasn't living in some sort of pain. I would show up to work with black eyes, cut lips, and banged up knees, and I wouldn't say anything to anybody because There was, at that time, there was about 50% of the chain of command that were 100% in support, and it was awesome. And I am so thankful for those folks. And if you're listening, thank you. I mean that. And then there's about 50% of the chain of command that were dead against it, because their view, which I respect as well, I don't agree with it, but I respect,
sure,
is I'm there to be an assaulter, not an MMA fighter, right? So I made it very, very clear, man. When I showed up to work, I was there to work. And although I was suffering, and sometimes I probably showed up to work concussed. And if we're doing an explosive breaching concentration, that concussion is probably getting worse, right? But at that time, I was so stubborn, and I said, I'm not letting anyone know that I'm banged up and I'm sore. I will do my job. Mm-hmm. I'll do my job to the best of my ability, because I don't want anybody to get in the way of my goal. My goal was to be the first Canadian Armed Forces soldier to fight in the UFC. That was my goal, and I was driven. The problem, which, it's just the way it worked out, is in between deployments and in between training iterations at the unit, I was trying to be a professional fighter. I wasn't fighting full time. I was fighting when time and opportunity presented itself.
Right.
So I was constantly in a position or an element of injury, dealing with injury. It was just normal way of life. I lived off of Motrin like they were Tic Tacs, mm-hmm. just to get through a daily training session at the unit. I never complain about it. Ask anybody that knows me well, and never hear me whine or bitch about it once. However, those years accumulated and took a toll. And, I've had multiple knee surgeries, multiple shoulder surgeries. I've had a lot of things banged up and broken. But, man, I loved every minute of it. And I look back at it now, and even today, like my wife, she won't hear me bitch and complain about the pain that I'm in. There's not a single day I don't wake up when I navigate the first set of stairs, and I can tell what kind of day it's going to be. So I navigate that first set of stairs, get out of bed. I know what kind of day it's going to be just by the way my knees feel, my ankles feel. But I don't care, man. I don't. I loved every minute of it, and I will go out on my sword. And I hope, I'll work until I'm no longer able. I hope when I go, I'm literally running across the range, doing a demo in a live fire range setting, and I just have a heart attack and hit the dirt. That's how I want to go. And I loved every minute of it. Every injury, every scar has been earned, and I have no regrets.
You talk about the goal of being the first Canadian Armed Forces member to fight in the UFC. How close were you to that, do you think?
I was pretty close. In 2014, I went down to southern Ontario, and I fought a gentleman named Malcolm Gordon. And I was an underdog. He was a young and up-and-comer. He's a stud of an athlete. And I knocked him out in the second round, and that kind of put me on the radar. And I was 33 years old at the time. He was 24, 25, I think.
Okay.
That put us on the radar. The UFC had made contact with my manager at the time and said, hey, we like Randy's story. We like his style. Tell him a couple more wins. We'll give him a long look. They'll never make a promise. But that same year, Bellator offered me a 4-fight contract.
Okay.
So we thought, well, if Bellator is offering a 4-fight contract, the UFC is probably looking and maybe it'll come, right? And then at that time, the UFC had introduced the flyweight division. So I did a test cut. So this was all leading up to the Malcolm Gordon fight. So I did a test cut to see if I could make 125 pounds. And it was Christmas dinner at the unit, and normally have a few pints and get fat and happy and enjoy the night. That was the night that I chose to do a test cut. So I left Christmas dinner, I went to the sauna, I locked myself in the sauna for 6 hours to see if I can make 125. And just so happened, I was at the YMCA, where it's underneath of the Canadian Tire Center, or Scotiabank Place, whatever it's called now, where the Senators play.
Yeah.
So there used to be a YMCA there. I locked myself into the sauna. Luckily, the young man that was closing the shop up came in to check if there was anybody in there, and he opened up the sauna door, and I was in a puddle, and just a heap. He's like, "Man, are you okay?" Well, yeah, I'm good, hanging on by just he's like, "We're closing." So, oh man, I'm so close. I had a scale with me. I'm so close. I'm only 2 pounds away. And he's like, "What are you trying to do?" So I'm trying to make 125.
What were you walking around at?
150.
Oh, okay.
So It was a tough cut, and what it did, though, is it gave me confidence. I said, we can make 125. So my thought was, if I drop down to 125, put on a good showing, which I did, drop down to 125, fought Malcolm Gordon, knocked him out. And it just didn't work out because my next two fights thereafter were losses. And now I'm 35 years old. I'm still in the swing at the unit. The unit was so gracious. They gave me basically 2 years of a hiatus, kind of, just to focus on MMA. They gave me 1 year. So I was in training squadron, and they said, just fulfill different roles in training squadron, but you can focus on MMA. So that was supposed to be a 1 year agreement. In that 1 year, had a couple of good fights. Things were going well. And then I asked for 1 more year. Now I know, like, the unit's like, hey, we gave you a year. Like, now we need you to be an operator. We need you to be an assaulter. No problem. Respect that. However, they granted it. So now I have 2 years. In my second year, suffered my first knee surgery. So I had, or second knee surgery, sorry. So my second knee surgery. So now I'm recovering when I'm supposed to be training and fighting.
Right.
So I was losing time. Right. So long story short, it didn't work out. And, hats off to Malcolm Gordon. He's fighting in the UFC. Actually just fought this past weekend. So good for him. I wish him nothing but the best, but it was close. That's all I can say, I guess. It was close.
I've heard a number of fighters talk about the impacts of cutting weight, and how did it impact you?
So cutting to 135 wasn't too bad. I typically would walk around between 145 and 150, just natural, not really thinking about too much, eating pretty clean, but 145, 150. So to cut to 135 was not a big deal. Felt good, felt strong in the cage. 125 was a little bit more of a challenge to get it, to make that weight. But then also, as I was getting older, I found that my recovery protocol was not significant enough so I could perform optimally the next day. So that's when I felt it. I felt it in the cage. I just felt sluggish. I didn't have the same energy jump in my step. Yeah, so I felt that as I was getting older, I just felt that recovery piece was not what it was when I started fighting.
And how much time from when you get off the scale at weigh-in to when you're actually stepping in the cage?
It's about 24 hours.
And how much weight? What do you walk in the cage at then?
Yeah, so the first couple of times I'd step on the scale, 125, and then I would climb into the cage. I'd be 145, 148.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
But is that, yeah. Still, it's just not the same weight as if you were walking around at that weight.
No, a lot of it's, that's right. A lot of it's water weight. It's amazing how much the body can endure. Mm-hmm. What I found, though, is such significant amounts of water, like my organs were affected. My brain was foggy. My heart and lungs felt heavy. It was just not good. I would not recommend that to anybody. I would not recommend it. A 10-pound, 12-pound cut is healthy. When I mean healthy, it's safe. Right? It's not. It's
repeatable. It's
right. It's not
it's in the margins. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but anything beyond that it's a bit much. It's extreme.
Now, when you made the decision to leave the military, did you have a sense beforehand about what you wanted to do in your life after uniform, or did you just decide now's the time to leave and I'm going to figure something out?
No, there was a few things that were leading me to retire when I did. I'm not casting shade. I'm just speaking facts. When the Liberals took power, I could see the writing on the wall, and I could tell that there was no appetite from the Liberal government to have organizations like ours get their hands dirty. So I already had one foot out the door when that happened. And then I saw some senior military leadership in very specific influential positions, which was another highlighting moment for me. I thought, this is not good for the Canadian Armed Forces. So I kind of had one foot out the door. I was hoping and hanging on to a glimmer of hope that things would change. I was hoping, I wanted to deploy. I wanted to be overseas. If I wasn't doing the job, to me, the next best thing was helping train the next batch of assaulters. So I loved my job. As the last 3 years I was at the unit, I was basically a full-time trainer, helping out, training the next batch of assaulters. So to me, if we weren't deployed, that was the next best thing. And I loved every minute of it, helping positively influence the next batch. That being said, I was waiting for a glimmer of hope. I was waiting for something to change. And I signed at that time, the CE, which is basically a continued employment. So my 20 years was up on the old system. And I committed to 20 years. I did 20 years. And the way that things were kind of happening from, an atmospherics and environmental perspective in the Canadian Air Force, I knew it was time to move on. So in 2018, I started to dabble with the idea of becoming an entrepreneur and running a business. I opened up a business and I incorporated a business, not knowing exactly what it would look like, but I looked at it like this. I kind of wrote things down and started to journal, and I said, what do I like to do? What do I really enjoy doing? And anything that has fighting related, I absolutely love it. So all things combative really ignite me, like fighting with a gun, fighting with my hands, fighting with a knife, anything that has to do with fighting motivated me. I live and breathe by a healthy lifestyle, so anything that has to do with nutrition, strength and conditioning, just being the best, most optimal version of ourselves always interests me as well. And then the last few years at the unit, I started to study sports psychology, human behavior, and organizational behavior. Okay. So these things really interest me. So I said, well, man, why don't I look at creating something that will involve these things that I really, really enjoy doing, and I'll just call it work.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and that's kind of how I started, and where the business is now in relation to where I thought it was going to be when it started is very different. Some aspects are quite different, where I didn't realize I'd be so involved with law enforcement. Providing training to our law enforcement professionals is what keeps me the busiest. A little bit to our military, and then the general public is it's an area that gets overlooked. Like being able to provide some sort of firearms training for the general public. We have a huge gun culture in Canada, but it's quiet. It's not nearly as overt as, in comparison to the States. But there are a lot of good Canadians that just want good training. And they often go to the States to get this training because there are guys like me, a dime a dozen, but not in Canada. So I saw an opportunity to provide for our Canadian citizens that are interested in this type of training. So these were the motivations that helped me kind of formulate the framework to get the business off the ground. And then once I did retire at the end of 2019, that's when I really started to put kind of my nose to the grindstone and get things in order. 2020 hit the ground running. I was hired by my old unit for a contract, and then a few weeks later I was hired by the RCMP for a contract, and I thought, man, this is great. What a way to start right out of the gate. But that was January 2020. And then if you look back and think back, so February and then March, what happened? Mm-hmm. COVID, and everybody stopped.
Right.
So I was just getting a business off the ground, hit the ground running, great contract with GTF2, another one with the RCMP, and then boom, nothing. So then I started to scramble, and I was getting worried because, my sergeant pension is not as lucrative as one might believe.
Right.
So trying to figure out ways to generate income and revenue. So in terms of becoming an entrepreneur, that's where, you're in the deep end, you figure it out, you either sink or swim. And I started doing online mentorship. I tore my basement apart. I put about $5,000 into my basement. I made it a fully functional private training center, and it was a revolving door. Once the word got out, I was 4 or 5 clients a day.
Right.
During COVID.
Yeah.
So I would tell people, listen, believe what you want with this COVID nonsense. I was like, but I plan on training. So if you want to train, it's just you and I. There's no one else in here. Come on in, let's train. And then once the word started to get out, it was good. So that helped me build some capital to put into the business for future endeavors.
Now, notwithstanding, COVID opening a business at that time, I mean, what's been the most challenging thing besides that as a small business owner, as an entrepreneur? Like, what have you learned that you maybe didn't have a skill that came transferable from the military that you had to develop?
I think like pricing things properly.
Right.
That was a bit of a challenge, and I think I've got it figured out now. But at the beginning, and I'll be completely honest with you, yes, I need to make a living, but I was never motivated by money, like ever. As long as I can remember, money has never been my number one priority. So getting started with the business, I sometimes undersold what I was bringing as a value. And, I've made some corrections along the way. I've had some, great mentors providing some advice for me as well along the way. Guys that have been in the business longer than I have, telling me to think about this, don't think about that kind of thing. So really good guidance. But I think the pricing was the biggest one. Like what is an ideal price where we want to encourage people to train, but not be afraid of the price point. They train once and then they can't afford it, so you never see them again. So I think the biggest challenge was trying to find that sweet spot, because I know what I bring to the table, and I know what value is to what I say and what I do and what I provide. But some people don't. Some people just see dollars and cents, right? They don't necessarily appreciate the value and the years of experience and the lessons learned that have brought me to this point, right? So I don't want to sell myself short, and at the same time, I want to entice people to come, and train and really experience it. So yeah, I think the biggest challenge was trying to find that sweet spot.
Is the environment harder in Canada? And I use the example of, there's probably a few places we can go with this, but in the U.S., there is no shortage of tier one operators who have gone into the business world, entrepreneurs, very public about their experience, and that seems to be there's no shortage of people you can find down in the U.S. It's not really the case here in Canada.
Yeah.
So I guess my couple of questions off that is that environment, is it been challenging in terms of your old community, looking at what you're doing and saying, that's not right, or we shouldn't be doing this, or finding mentors, because like the pricing one's a great example. I mean, how do you know what your value is to the marketplace if there's not really anybody else in the marketplace with your skills doing what you're doing? Right. So just throw a few of those things out there for maybe some thoughts.
Definitely some good questions there. Like, I think there's probably guys at the unit that, see what I'm doing and they're dead against it. They're like, "No, Randy, what is he doing? He shouldn't be doing that. He shouldn't be, selling these skills to people he doesn't know." There's probably those naysayers. They're going to be everywhere, right? And then there's a large portion, the portion that I choose to surround myself with, who are very supportive, and they see what I'm doing and they're on board. And I think you're right. When there's, one of one in the country doing what I'm doing, it's tough to compare to what's not there. In the States, it's very different. Bigger demographic, bigger geographical footprint, and there's a lot of guys like myself doing this type of stuff. The reality is they're in the States. Things are different in the States than they are in Canada. So just to provide some of this training to the general public, for example, is a risk. It's a risk because, despite what people think or say, like the gun culture in Canada, you would think would be very supportive of each other. But similar to what we talked about earlier, I think it's just a Canadian thing, man. They're like crabs in a bucket. They would much rather pull you down than lift you up. What I'm trying to do is share some positive for folks that happen to own guns that are not prohibited. They're on the non-restricted list. They're legit and legal to have. But there are so many people within the gun culture in Canada that would sooner cascade. Like, for an example, I was at the range not too long ago, providing some training for a civilian course. So general public, we're doing this course, and in the outline, I told the folks what we're doing, how to register, and specifically non-restricted firearms only. So, if you have a license for a pistol, bring your pistol. That's a restricted item, but no prohibited devices. AR-15, for example. So if you have one, leave it in your locker. So everybody shows up, and I check all their guns and gear. Everybody's on the up and up. They know the reality and the ramifications and the seriousness of the legalities to bring in a gun to one of my courses, where I would punt them and no refund, but also the trust would be eroded. Yeah. So anyway, they show up. They do the course. They love it. Everything's good. And it's all positive. Somebody at that range saw us training, made an assumption about what we were doing or what firearms are being used, and reported direct action to the Chief Firearms Office of Ontario. Then I get a phone call with questions about what I'm doing and who I'm providing training for. My point is, this individual who made an assumption, instead of coming to me and talking to me about it and asking those pointed questions, decide to go around me, make a report. So those are the snakes in the grass that are everywhere, right? So instead of a gun culture that's looking out for each other, helping each other, or maybe encouraging something very similar, instead, who does that guy think he is? I'm going to screw him over because I don't like what he's doing. I'm jealous. I'm envious, or whatever your ugly nuance is on the inside. My point is the gun culture in Canada could be a lot healthier than what it is, but we're in tumultuous times, man. Like everything when it's spoken about anything to do with firearms, people get very defensive, and there's questions that are being asked about the government's direction. They don't even know. Like, they don't even know where the future is going in terms of the firearms regulations in Canada. So where I'm going with this is I'm trying to navigate the waters. I'm trying to stay on top of what is legal, what is not legal, what we can and cannot do, but yet still provide a product for general public to engage with. Man, there's days where I'm like, why do I bother? Like, why do I bother? Because there's just one obstacle after another, or somebody that's just not happy or jealous about what I'm doing, or think that they should be doing it or they could do it better. Man, how about this? We just help each other out and lift each other up. Imagine how good things could be here in Canada.
I love your point about the surrounding yourself with those supportive people, because I don't think it matters what you're doing in life. You can always find people who are the naysayers, who aren't supportive, and it's absolutely counterproductive to surround yourself with them. I couldn't agree more. And on the training side, I think people, guns become very emotional for a bunch of reasons. I'm not sure that the reasons have a lot of basis in logic, but I guess that's the reality of emotional arguments. What I would say, though, is that any training is good training.
Yeah.
Like training to drive a car better, training to use a firearm better. This is all good. So offering a service that helps people use a tool they have better, safer, more appropriately, I don't see how that's a downside. But again, people get emotional about issues, and it becomes very difficult to even have a civil conversation about it.
Agreed.
Right?
Yeah, agreed.
Which I would like to think that the whole idea of mature dialogue and debate is that the best idea wins out, and I'm going to learn from you, you're going to learn from me. We don't have to walk out of here agreeing on everything. Sure. But that's okay.
Yeah.
That matters not. As long as we have that sort of mutual respect for one another, then I think that's the most important thing.
I had another funny incident that happened not too long ago. I was in Cabela's with my wife, and was just looking around, and every now and again there's sales on ammunition, which for people that don't know, ammunition is crazy expensive. And I overheard this gentleman asking somebody else behind the counter. So there's a gentleman who was interested in purchasing, I think it was .22 ammunition is what he was after. So he doesn't know a lot about ammunition. I overheard him say, "I'm just getting into shooting. I just purchased, a Ruger 10/22, and I'm wondering what kind of ammunition to buy for it." The gentleman that's around over the counter working for Cabela's, again, we talk about mentorship and being positive. He has an opportunity here to educate, to help,
right,
and to provide a service. I nearly went across the counter at this guy. I literally want to slap this guy silly, because the way he spoke to the gentleman who was asking the questions, you would have sworn he had a dick growing out of his forehead. I'm like, why would you talk to somebody that way? You have an opportunity to educate and to teach and to share firearms, safe firearms handling and everything positive about firearms here in Canada. But instead, this guy working behind the counter at Cabela's talked to this gentleman who was asking legitimate questions. He was open about, I'm novice. I don't know what I don't know. And this guy was like, well, just the attitude and the demeanor and the pushback. Well, no wonder the gentleman was hesitant to even ask the question, dealing with a guy like that.
Right.
So anyway, I overheard it. I was trying everything in my power not to launch across the counter at this guy. So I kind of nudged the dude that was asking questions. I'm like, here, man, I'll give you a hand. So I walk around the corner and, I show him the different 22 ammo and ask him about what he's shooting and what he wants it for, blah, blah, blah. He's like, hey, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate that. I'm like, yeah, it took 3 minutes out of my day.
Right.
And now he has a positive experience versus this guy who's getting paid by Cabela's to be a jackass.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Nope. I mean, the impact of positive experiences and kindness and compassion, I think is highly underrated. It really can stick with people for a long, long time. I'm sure that guy will recount that story of you taking a couple of minutes just to explain and ask some questions and show some interest in him, in his new interest.
Yeah.
Yeah, without a doubt. As I think about sort of the other aspects of your business here, I mean, you also do on the personal training side with combatives. I'd be interested in your thoughts on, especially as you get, we all get older, but as you get into your 30s and 40s, the importance of nutrition, because I think a lot of people think they can outwork a bad diet, but how do you roll nutrition into this sort of the training and the wellness aspect of what you do with people?
Yeah, great question. So I'll provide nutritional guidance based on experiences and what I've studied. So I've had the great opportunity to do a few nutritional courses that give me a framework of understanding of, macro, micro ingestion, blood type, and how that affects different food ingestion and breakdown. So some of that stuff I'll provide with the clients. And you're absolutely right. As we do get older, it's so important that what we, feed our body, not just for performance and feeling good, but to deal with inflammation, to deal with, bruises, banged up joints, etc. It has so much to do with not only what we're eating, but the time at which we eat it. So that's the type of stuff that I'll help with folks that, some of them come in really educated already and they have a pretty good knowledge, but some people, they don't. And it's just when they ask for it, I'll provide for it. But, there is a piece with the nutrition that gets overlooked, and to try to keep it as simple as possible. The way I look at it is, the more colorful your plate, the better. Eat lots of fruits and vegetables every single day, and keep your food whole. Stay away from processed meat or processed food in general. Stay away from sugar, and literally it's that simple. So lots of fruits and vegetables, good healthy whole protein, and you'll find that your body will thank you for it.
With your clients on the training side, are there any real misconceptions or real common problems that you see when people come in that most people are doing this or most people aren't doing this?
I would say most common is prehab and posthab. So most clients will not spend a proper amount of time or healthy amount of time, maybe is the right terminology, for proper warm up protocols, and then at the end of a session, proper stretching protocols. That kind of gets overlooked because everyone's in a rush, right?
Right.
Gotta get in, gotta get out. So the warm up kind of gets sped through. Cool down gets sometimes completely forgotten, and it's just off the go. So I think those are the two areas that, if you're really serious about training to prevent injuries, dedicate 5-6 minutes on the front end, 5-6 minutes on the back end to really warm the body up, and then to cool it down, stretch it out properly.
I remember seeing this, what was it? It was a 60 minutes, but it wasn't the regular 60 minutes. Kelly Starrett?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's great.
Yeah, so Kelly Starrett was on one of these sort of 60-minute sports things, and he was working with an NFL team. I forget which one, but he talked about this specific issue, and it was his example to the reporter was, I went in and we did our first sort of training session. Then we were going out to the field to practice this. He said, and what I noticed is that none of the young guys were interested in it, but all the veterans were really paying attention because they'd been injured, they'd been dealing with all these things, and now they were listening. And I found the same thing. I mean, when I finished a certain job in the Army, I just felt like every muscle just hurt. I just felt busted, and I transitioned to doing so much more mobility and warm up and strengthening different parts of my body that just neglected over the years. And I feel so much better as a result of that.
Good for you. Yeah, keep it up, because you're absolutely right. The more, the softer our muscle tissues are, and the more limber our bodies will be, the less chance of sustaining those injuries.
I guess the first thing is there anything else you want to talk about, or any messages on direct action you want to push out?
Yeah, I guess the message would be for folks that are just trying to improve a little bit, no matter what that is. Think of it like we set a goal for ourselves. We see the outcome that we want to achieve. You'll use a staircase analogy. So at the top of that next landing is the outcome. That's the thing that we want to achieve. But where we're starting is at the landing below. And the only way that we can get there is one step at a time. There's no easy button. There's no way to skip multiple stairs. There's no way to skip multiple steps to achieve that thing. So the message that I would share with people is, no matter what you're trying to achieve, know that it's a process. We are living in a world where everything is instant gratification. We need an answer to a problem. We ask the Google box or whatever. And everything is very quick and tangible to achieve. That's what people want. I believe, to the core of my being, the reality is things take time. Anything that's worth having is worth struggling for. Anything that is worth achieving is worth putting time and effort into. So you're going to climb that set of stairs to achieve that goal. It's one step at a time. Along the way, we might slip, might fall, just have to reset. Doesn't mean you have to go back to the first landing. Doesn't mean you have to go back to stair number one. You just reset where you are, realign, and then continue to persevere to the next landing.
What advice do you give to your clients for goal setting to make sure that they have a proper frame of mind when they're stepping off to try and achieve something?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for goal setting, what I would say is the way to approach it is we think it, and then when we write it down, it becomes a little bit more real. And then when we share it with somebody that we trust, it becomes real. But sometimes with goals, we'll internalize and contemplate for a long time. And then, months go by, years go by, and then we don't get after that thing that we're trying to achieve. So I truly believe if we're thinking it, and that's a reoccurring thought, then it's worth your attention. So this thing keeps coming to my head. Write it down so you can see it. So we think it, then we write it down, we see it, and then speak it to somebody that you truly believe in, somebody you know is not going to judge you, somebody that is supporting you. Share it with them. So speak it, read it, see it, and then, when you think about something, the more you think about it, it becomes reality. The more you talk about it, it becomes reality. So it reinforces what it is that you're trying to achieve. So think it, see it, speak it.
That's a good segue into the last question. I ask guests for any recommendations they have to the listener that either educate them, it could be something to entertain them, or if you want to elevate a particular cause. So do you have any recommendations or things that you'd like to pass on to the listeners that you personally enjoy on the educate, entertain, or elevate sort of spectrum?
Oh, man, that's good. So a few really good books that I've read. One I'd recommend to pretty much anybody is a Gavin de Becker book called The Gift of Fear. Great book. I'd recommend that. Elevate or entertain, rather, would be, I personally like stand-up comedy. I can't get enough of it.
Oh, right on.
Yeah, I absolutely love stand-up comedy. There's a lot of great entertainers out there. And, stand-up comedians are super intelligent, man. Generally speaking, they're wicked smart.
Their minds work really fast.
Really fast, yeah. And sometimes they come across as vulgar, and maybe they use a flavor of language that doesn't suit everybody. Man, get over that. Get over that. Just listen to the message and allow yourself to laugh. And I think all of us could do a little bit more laughing in today's world, right? So, stand-up comedians, if you get an opportunity to see it live or you watch it on a show or something, I would recommend it to anybody. Get a chance to laugh a little bit, and then elevate. So, I like what you just mentioned there about volunteering. I have got some great neighbors around me, and we had a pretty bad snowstorm a couple of weeks ago, and we were out of town. And I reached out to our neighbors who have a young teenage boy, and I said, "Hey, man, can you ask Dominic to shovel the driveway, and I'll give him $40." And whatever he did or whatever our neighbors did, they basically rallied the troops, and we had our neighbors shoveling our driveway. So we came back from out of town. You can imagine, driveway would have been full of snow, frozen, solid ice, and our neighbors, volunteered their time and cleaned it out. So, that meant a lot to me. And if I get an opportunity to pay that forward in the future, I definitely will. So I think that's awesome. Volunteer some time, no matter what it is, big, small, doesn't matter. Volunteer something.
Well, thanks for having me on the mat today, Randy, and I really appreciate you being on the podcast and being one of our Northern Sentinels.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me, and feel free to reach out anytime.
You can find information in the show notes on Randy's MMA career, the recruiting process for Canada's Special Operating Forces, and his company, Direct Action Combat Performance. Thanks for listening, and goodbye until next time.